All right, welcome fellow psychonauts, mind travelers. This is Dr. J, and I'm here today to have a little chat about entheogens and the quest for meaning, alternatively, lifting the veils. So this is a little preview of my lecture in Ashland this June. So let's get started, and I'd like to start with a little discussion on alchemy. You know, much can be learned from the old alchemists of the day. These were the early psychonauts. They attempted to fire, distill, and congeal the elements into their ultimate conclusion, the quintessence, the lapis philosophorum, the tabula smaragdine, or emerald tablet. And this was a psychedelic process as they projected their consciousness onto matter, a feat for which modern science has revealed to be a most peculiar yet fundamental process, that entanglement between matter and consciousness, the intentionality and fluidity of the world. And this has been taught to us over and over again throughout the world's greatest mythologies, that true transformation is no further away than what lies in between our ears. And of course, on occasion, behind our breastplate. So the inscription here this is a piece by the great German theosophist, Kabbalist, and Hermetic mystic Heinrich Kuhnrath. And the inscription on the top beam reads in Latin, "While sleeping watch." And this essentially means that alchemical work involves use of the conscious as well as unconscious operations. The entheogenic vision, or what I'm calling entheovision, is a distillation or precipitate of this process, the gateway to the personal and collective unconscious and to the very fabric of reality itself. So much can be learned from alchemy and ancient texts and even ancient philosophers. I mean, Lao Tzu said 2,600 years ago that the key to growth is the introduction of higher dimensions of consciousness into our awareness. So welcome to the alchemical journey, my friends, the flight of the alone to the alone. You enter as a naked ape through the alchemical doorway and avail yourself of the great mystery that is the journey into the other. Taking flight through the holographic, interactive, Tange Mero Magritte Pacabio Cyrillus gallery within a Riemannian world of sacred geometry, to unearth the Ouroboros and discover that we have returned to the place that we began. The eternal return. We will ascend through the Cluverian form constants, lattice and fretwork, the tunnels, funnels, and passageways of the Bardo and the Ganuga Gap, greater ontological dimensions of meaning, and further through the finely filigreed, organic, and complex hyperdimensional infundibular forms of the Logos and Eschaton as we lay witness to the singularity, the Hunab Ku, the womb of the Great Mother, that great pan-galactic cloud computer at the center of the universe, which is everywhere and everywhen, and where mundane reality and Western science ends and speculation begins. Of course, this is more than an astonishing trip through the psychedelic art galleries and historical archives of the galactic enterprise. This is a Cartesian passage through madness as we melt into the cosmic mirror that alludes to the mystic psychotic collapse of the externalized ego that stabilizes our inner void. This is the Tao of the ancestors, a voyage on the saucy seas to Byzantium where the oversoul, the human mind lattice, and the Empyrean rebus assimilate you into its Borg-like matrix. You stand astonished and befuddled as you make your way through Ian's room, that sensorium tremendum and higher topological manifold of temporality, through McKenna's rose window topologies where we find Loch Ellis's jeweled ruins and phosphorescent maidens howling demon songs beneath a violet moon. We are the neuroarchitects, mind artists, and ontological engineers of the Golden Age, so put on your scrubs, take the red pill, and lie back on your gurney. As above, so below. And had I been Henry David Thoreau taking this alchemical journey, I quite possibly would have said, I took this journey into the other because I wish to live deliberately, to confront the only essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discovered that I had not lived. You know, in my very first critical analysis of our modern culture's primeval view of drugs, the commercial "This is your brain on drugs" hit my subtle register as a bit curious, and many years later as rather misguided. At some gut level, you could say at the unconscious level, a part of the mind that even for a young child is sort of a wise old elder, already knew this message reflected the compartmentalizing, polaristic, and pathologically paranoid nature of our society. In fact, I think it was Tim Leary who said LSD created more paranoia in people who did not take it. Our Western culture categorizes all drugs as taboo, and abusive street drugs get put in the same bottom junk drawer as DMT and psilocybin. Secondly, that commercial was a sloppy, one-sided metaphor. The brain as a fried egg is much more palatable than the slimy raw egg of mundane reality. It provides nourishment, and this should help us to appreciate the egg in itself. From the beginning, its wonders and marvels, its symbol of the fertility of imagination, a seed of higher consciousness that is ready to be activated, and by its presence unveils the age-old dilemma of which came first, a perfect metaphor for introducing the importance of ancient and alchemical mystery in mythology. Thirdly, if you've ever tried entheogens, you'll know that a fried egg is far from a good representation of a mind-bending entheogenic exploration. If, for example, you decide to have breakfast at the Mysterium Tremendum Cafe, well, then you may opt for the flaming ayahuasca asparagus omelet with blotter rainbow huachuma hollandaise sauce and a side of psilocybin cinnamon toast. Well, then you're in for a life-transforming breakfast of champions, not a life of laziness and regression. The eggs eat you for breakfast. If life gives you lemons, make lemonade, right? Well, if life gives you entheogens with a side of lemons, which would be interesting, make lemon meringue. The point is, we've got to cook our gooses a little bit if we want any kind of significant change in our society. And let us not forget that first drug bust, Adam and Eve taking an apple from the tree from the serpent, who was an old, wise deity, a consort of the goddess, in fact. And being a consort of the goddess, I believe this myth is an ancient reflection of a very significant event in the history of the human species. It's our birth as intelligent modern beings. This was an intervention, perhaps, and perhaps this is our purpose as beings in the universe. Ultimately, we will be in that position. I've talked to many people. In fact, myself, I've had many experiences on DMT and ayahuasca in which different entities and beings are celebrating. And I couldn't help but notice that this was the celebration of a very significant event in our own history, and the celebration of perhaps coming together as a intergalactic civilization. But this shift, this taking of the apple, this was a sacrifice on the part of the mother of Gaia, right? For civilization would come at a temporary cost, pollution, madness, war, and so on. Yet it would allow greater acceleration of the expression of her beauty, her fullest form and essence. And it's possible that this is where the Christ myth emerged from. But this was the replacement of the nurturing mother with the usurping father, yet it was necessary, this shift in consciousness. And now it is time, my friends, for the eternal return. It's time to eliminate Promethean guilt, to reinterpret the fire, and put Mama's apple pie back on the table. Now, although I believe that understanding awareness is the key, and not necessarily the relative objects floating in awareness, just awareness itself, but I think the stage of explicating the nature of the experience, the landscape, the sacred geometries, is an important phase and represents a sort of chrysalis of the development of humans as spiritually empowered beings. It's a way to reform language and hence thinking, bootstrapping us into higher levels of awareness so that we become open to these processes. So it's about, you could say, transformation rather than transcendence. And as a wise old teacher told me, this begins with knowing and understanding who we are, because without knowing who we are at the most fundamental level, and without finding the ground of our experience, we cannot truly know anything else. In this process, as we'll discuss here today, this also involves embracing beauty in art, including our ability to express the depths of our inner core, our acorns, extruding our souls, which I believe initially involves exploring and describing these psychedelic realms and psychic manifestations. But we've lost the symbols, but we need the symbols. They come up in entheovisions and nightmares and disturbed dreams. You know, Joe Campbell believed these symbols represent the creation of our own personal mythologies. And symbolism, it comes from the Greek word symbolon, to put or throw together. And symbols connect on a beam. Something on a lower level is connecting to something on a higher level, which represents the alchemical maxim, as above, so below. Rituals are collections of symbols in action. And when you're united with a symbol, you're united to that which it symbolizes. It pulls together all kinds of levels of reality. So you could really say that the symbols are more real than real, at least more real than the mundane world. Symbols appear in all kinds of psychic manifestations. There are symbolic thoughts and feelings, symbolic acts and situations. It often seems that even inanimate objects cooperate with the unconscious in the arrangement of symbolic patterns. There are numerous well-authenticated stories of clocks stopping at the moment of their owner's death, such as Frederick the Great at Sanssouci. But visionary symbols operate in the whole of living nature, and then there's this entanglement. The universe is more fluid, intentional, flexible, responsive, and alive than we ever thought possible. You know, Carl Jung used to, when he walked into his study, would say, "Ladies and gentlemen, pots and pans, I would like you all now to cooperate." He understood this entanglement. And now we come to the gallery of Pimbles. These are, it's a pet name, Pimble, for symbolic pictures, characters, archetypes. And they're poetic, artistic, surreal, poignant expressions of the self and the energies of the cosmos, whether fragments of the self yearning for completion, flashes of numinous insight, whisperings of the alien supermind, or the cosmic codes for the seed of life. These images are dense with data. They're information generators or concrescences. They tell a story, and they can really guide your research. The difficulty in integrating many of the experiences of entheogenic substances is that the phenomenon is often beyond the capability of our language to serve as a descriptive engine, making the experience ineffable and often profoundly moving. The image itself can be integrated into one's life, and this is a kind of a symbolic healing, because there's a mystical sense of identification with the universe. One is emotionally and spiritually galvanized and left with a lasting impression. Although language from this process can be reformed as the tool of thought, allowing us to reform our thinking in fundamentally new ways. And these scenes, these interactions, beings, symbols, archetypes, etc., are so beyond ordinary concepts and so infused with a profound, awe-inspiring force that on a psychic and emotional level, our routine manner of observing the world is displaced and dissolved. It dissolves boundaries. It's also this dissolution of the ego and defenses, as well as the very identity of self, that seems to reconstruct a newly found rapture for life itself, just as one who comes close to death will gain a greater appreciation for the life they nearly lost. It's a combination of all these factors that renders these symbolic and meaningful motifs as positively life-altering. Now, I had my own very interesting symbolic enrichment. And I had been taking ayahuasca in a ritual through the Santo Daime Church for about 3 years up to this time. And what I encountered would really sort of allow me to gain some healing on a much deeper level. In fact, I became a joiner, meaning that I became a ferdato or a daimista. Prior to that, I was a self-proclaimed non-joiner. But something about that session caused me to open up to the auspices and the process of the institution itself, believing that being a member would perhaps allow for more in-depth healing, which to some extent it certainly did. But I came in encounter with this giant cylindrical hydra-like machine sentinel with a piercing red lens at its core, various rotating spheres, and churning out coils upon coils of DNA. Essentially, I saw the Leviathan, right? Moby Dick style. I was dragged into the depths. It was nature as machine god. It was kind of this alchemical wager or synthesis of mother and father, the archaic and the transcendental. And it was completely transformative for me. You know, was this a newly emerging mythological motif or archetypal resonance? Was I at the center of the universe? The Hunab-Ku, the womb of the Great Mother, the galactic center, or even the solar image, which has 7 rotating spheres, witnessing the galactic transmutation machine? Or was this a future vision of a technological singularity where we become the hyperdimensional digital god? Whatever the message, the fact remained that a personally meaningful and profound visionary state engendered integration and positive personal and spiritual growth. And it's the symbolic action of these visionary states and interactions that really plays a very significant role in the healing process. So during altered states of consciousness, we gain access to a sort of mythic consciousness, which from a neurophysiological perspective may represent accessing ancient parts of the brain, for example, the reptilian complex. From a more transpersonal cosmic perspective, right, because when I explain the machinery of everything, this is allowing the reducing valves to open up. From this perspective, we're opening up to a vast multi-hyperdimensional domain, superintelligences, other civilizations, and so forth. The experience of symbolic visionary states appears to reorient these deeply embedded primitive belief structures, and often these images can be so vivid and poignant that a deep chord is struck in the psyche. That goes without saying. Benny Shannon, who wrote The Antipodes of the Mind and cataloged these ayahuasca experiences, referred to this as a metaphorical parable, which is not unlike parables in the Bible. An image is presented, the experience takes away a moral. This represents a type of mystical, metaphorical, cognitive orientation, and as we create stories from our lives and restructure the flow of life into meaningful objects, we may not only relieve distress and suffering, as my own research indicated, but we positively alter our sense of beingness. So the entheovision is similar to a type of archetypal transformation or hero's journey. We may discover mythopoetic concepts of traditional and alchemical scriptures to be more apropos than modern psychological concepts in explicating the nature of the experience. The entheovision promotes a type of spiritual and existential intelligence, a mythical religious component of human culture, and this engenders empathy with the irreducible and mysterious dimensions of life. The entheovision appears to restore a primitive form of perception of which the myth itself is the principal collective manifestation. An example from my research study in which I interviewed participants of the Santo Daime Church was the Christos theme. The experience came into direct contact with the Christos. They entered into Supreme Christ consciousness, becoming transformed, feeling they understand the story, the meaning, the significance. From the profession of rapture to sacrifice and salvation, death, and then rebirth. It's as if one has entered into the story and become the central actor. And so here we have a newly emerging spiritual tradition as well, doing away with the intermediary and going for direct experience. But the pivotal theme in Christ consciousness here is that participants enter into this notion of salvation, and this bears its translation into the release of an undesirable state or condition, like old cultural or religious paradigms, negative behaviors, traumas, etc., and toward redemption, healing, and health through release and transformation. And this is a significant healing process. I've come to call this animated mythological communion, or AMC. And believe me, it's a channel with much more interesting cinema and broadcasting. This is a type of novel information processing program that allows the mind to invent new solutions to see things from a fresh perspective. There also appears to be a paradoxicality in mystical experiences where conflicts between opposing ideas appear to be reduced and reframed as reciprocal components of a greater whole, where each as part of kind of a more complete understanding. And this theme of pairs of opposites, of course, is a significant aspect of myth and mythological themes, what Jung called coincidentia positorum. And this may transform the way in which we feel about ourselves, our community, the world around us. William James, in fact, expressed this paradoxicality as a primary component of mystical experiences, labeling it reconciliation or metaphysical significance, where the opposites of the world melt into unity. Dun, 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 dun. This just in: Richard Dawkins renounces atheism after smoking DMT. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so DMT. Let's talk about DMT. What I sometimes refer to as the cosmic Merkaba portal, and I'll explain this here in a second. But with DMT, you have to awake to the notion that you don't know, and that's the beginning of starting to know. Everything exists where we can see it. It encourages the impossible. We have to bring, something back from this experience as we're dragged into the depths, right? Tools for the tribe, the fractal nature of the experience, the geometry. So these experiences should not be diminished. It should lead us to understand that the individual brain, first of all, is not the seat of consciousness, which is the old mechanistic view, but that it's more like a program being tuned into a greater source. And that's precisely what I believe from my own experiences and other people's experiences and my own research into what these images were. That's why I believe this was important. And this led me to a completely new understanding of the world and how it works. So in all of my visions, and I have a rendering for you, it's a very amateur, sort of childish rendering, but that's the best I could do given my current level of artistic ability. In almost every one of my ayahuasca sessions, I would see this sacred geometry or Merkaba or mandala at the center of my perceptual field. Emanating from its core were these lines. Sometimes I would see either myself or another being in the center of that with its limbs sort of emanating in the same a similar sequence as those lines that were emanating from that geometric core. And I realized later on, after doing research into the repressed scientific archives, that what I was seeing was the true cosmic Merkaba, the center of the universe. And all of space-time is the emanation of a single geometric force. If you zoom into any point in the universe, that's the center. It's everywhere and everywhen, right? We live in a holographic universe. But consciousness, biological life, and light are emanations of this quantum form. DNA is a precipitate of the quantum field, which is why I was always seeing DNA in my DMT visions. The code is written into the core of the geometry that's all around us. It's a crystallized form of a centralized universal geometry. All life forms can be built from simple geometric resonances, in fact. And if I had more time, I would go more deeply into that because it's fascinating, the implications there. So the pineal gland is not protected by the triple B, the blood-brain barrier, so fluid inside gathers an increasing amount of mineral deposits or brain sand over time. These have optical and chemical properties similar to the enamel in our teeth. The pineal cells reflect light through a process known as phototransduction cascade. And the hexagonal-shaped crystals are piezoelectric. They expand and contract in the presence of electromagnetic fields and give off light, known as piezoluminescence. Flooding the bloodstream with DMT may load up the pineal gland with additional piezoelectric microcrystals. This, in turn, causes the third eye, which actually has a lens, to pull in many more photons, much like how DNA actually pulls in photons from a zero-point field. In fact, there were two Russian scientists in the 80s, Garyev and Poponin, using a quartz container or a cuvette with a DNA sample in it. It would zap light into the room, photons would appear all over, but when DNA is in the room, it acts like a mini black hole. It's very peculiar. And what's crazy is this was 30 years ago, and that was actually discovered 10 years before that. So why isn't this stuff all over the world? It's insane. So there is we may actually be seeing photons of light. There's an electromechanical coupling mechanism. So DMT may be the resin that Manly Palmer Hall, who was an alchemical scholar, said the ancient mystery schools were looking for. The biggest secret of Freemasonry is the regeneration of the human being into a divine state through the awakening of the pineal gland. And this is the lost key of Masonry. Each of the 33 degrees of Masonry correspond to one of the vertebrae in the human spine. As the Kundalini spirit fire rises up and enters into the domed chamber of the human skull, it finally passes into the pituitary body, or Isis, where it invokes Ra, the pineal gland. Operative Masonry signifies the process by which the eye of Horus is opened. Descartes suggested the pineal was the seat of the soul, perhaps more wisely than he knew. The Hindus teach that the pineal is the third eye, called the eye of Dogma, the all-seeing eye in Buddhism, or the eye-seeing in Christianity. It's also referred to as the Philosopher's Stone. The legend of the Holy Grail is yet another symbolic reference to the pineal gland. The chalice is shaped like a pineal gland in most historical references. All right, so now we're going to get into entheogenic metaphysics, as I'm calling it. And we'll start by talking about the different stages of consciousness, kind of where we were, where we are, and where we're headed. And we've had two great stages of consciousness in human history. First stage was hunter-gatherer consciousness. We had intimate participation with the natural order. We were part of it. We had no sense of self. We revered the generativity of nature. We had enchantment. We lived in the world of animism. The origins of ecstasy through dance and music emerged. Second stage of history, we reduced nature from a generative force, including our own nature, to a productive force. And this is the great break in consciousness, from generativity to productivity. And in that process, we learned from the Neolithic agricultural era until today, the end of the pyrotechnical era, the nuclear era, and the emerging technium, as Kevin Kelly calls it, we learned how to detach ourselves from nature, control it from a distance. The self emerged in history. We became captains of our fate. But in that process, we lost intimacy, that sense of participation, the early bonds of generativity. So in the Western modern world, materialism results in the involvement in the spiritual world as kind of being given way to magical thinking, or sometimes outright pathology. And there's great disenchantment. Now, you could say that disenchantment actually goes back pretty early, even with the creation of tools in linguistic development. Even during that first stage that I talked about earlier, it was at least beginning to take hold. The first linguistic and religious civilizations began to have the, differentiation of human self as a subject acting upon the world as object. So that begins a process of disenchantment that we have today. So the objectification of the world is where we are, this atomistic, mechanistic view where the only true realm is the realm of measurable objects and forces. Everything else, images in the mind, thoughts, imagination, intuition, symbols, or just merely subjective thought, have lost credibility and importance. So what's the third stage of consciousness? A transformation to a species of understanding, reclaiming a sense of participation with the community of life. The realization that we're one. Now, this is a very big step that will help us get out of suffering. If we understand that we're all one, why would we kill each other? And this decision we make is to reclaim our relationship to the generativeness of the creation, a re-enchantment with the cosmos and the plants, taking the primal perspective, but also taking the modern perspective, right? This is the core of the Don Quixote story, not sacrificing the values of the past when we entangle them with the future. Technology perhaps will provide some kind of level of re-enchantment. I mean, it already is very enchanting. And that's the true merger. That's what the alchemical wedding is all about. Mother and father, technology and the primal. That's the coincidentia positorum. Dance and creative expression, entrainment, the notion that everything is alive. Even hearts have their own intelligence, an electrical field, and will entrain with other hearts. Kind of like that Kirlian photograph of the heart there on the bottom right. That's what music does. It entrains brain waves, and we all have similar states. Technology is entrainment too. This initiation into the next level of human consciousness. So the great blunder of the modern world is scientific misdirection. and our perspective. The scientific method, which is a rational approach, tends to minimize what it doesn't understand, and it sort of maintains this notion that, well, everything's explainable. Mystery is kind of the enemy, and meaning that it prefers pejorative and even wrong answers to admitting its own lack of understanding, hence the pejorative reflex. We don't understand, we shoot first, we ask questions later. It's cowboy science, right? It's kind of like, oh, we don't understand that 97% of DNA. Let's call it junk DNA, right? Rather than mystery DNA. And that's a whole area that I could get into that would take us beyond the scope of this chat, but it's very fascinating when you look at the invisible hand of DNA, that there is an intelligent force permeating all of life. But, so I included this picture of the Arecibo radio telescope arrays. Here we are searching for extraterrestrial intelligence with these stupid, primitive radio transmissions. I mean, are you serious? Okay, if there's an interstellar, an advanced civilization that can travel on an interstellar basis, they're not going to be using these primitive technologies. But when you do the research in one area, you realize that we already have made contact and that we have the more benevolent members of our society actually making direct contact through remote viewing and using certain what are called CE5 protocols that Dr. Stephen Greer came up with. The problem is there's a lot of misinformation and psychological warfare because this is suppressed knowledge. And so 90% of the stuff about ETs and UFOs is garbage, nonsense, BS. The remaining 10% is the truth. The fact that over 100 top military and CIA government officials have come forward and revealed this, and that some countries in South America have already stepped forward with this. This is a huge event. There's no collaboration in society. That's where we need to come together. That's the unity and transformation, making our dreams one dream, coming together. And I think we really need to deeply and truly understand the awe and genius of nature. When you really get it, I mean, really become genuinely moved by the exquisite machinery, you then know that it's not random. Those devout scientists like Neil deGrasse Tyson and others don't allow their true feelings to be heard. They're too busy being the big monkey, trying to win in this polaristic oppositional society. They're trying to get to the truth, and it's great to understand the mechanisms and be in love with the science, but when you don't allow flexibility in your thinking, you miss the big picture. When truth is in front of you, you're going to ignore it, in fact. Okay, so the entheovision as graphical user interface theory. In a previous chat, I called the dream graphical user interface, the dream GUI. Entheovision, dreamscape, same basic ballpark. In short, it's an animated psychic interface that allows for greater conscious control, programming, synthesis, and restoration. So when you open up your laptop and look at your PC, what do you see? You've got a graphical user interface. And what does that have? You've got icons, right? Or an icon-driven world. This is a parallel between the material world of technology and the ethereal world of the personal and collective unconscious. In both realms, we have downloads and uploads and viruses. This also represents a yearning for the archaic and the transcendental, right? The underground and the hyperspace. Having strong roots in hell, your tree will be able to reach heaven. Coincidentia positorum. Our technologies and cultural artifacts represent a deep human desire and quest for the journey to the other. We project our consciousness onto it. It's like a modern archetypal and alchemical function. So the entheovision is a graphical user interface. It's a liminal zone that allows one to transect some hyperdimensional reality or object, to forge that spirit-matter bridge, to surf the cosmic web and view the iconography of the archetypes, the concrescences. The psychedelic intoxication, namely via DMT, represents a type of biological and metaphysical transmission or broadcast produced by the DMT's cleansing, scanning, defragging, dissolving, and restorative function of a highly complex, multi-sensory, spiritual, multidimensional being. This recalibrates our psychic constitution and perhaps provides an opportunity for quote-unquote uploading ourselves within the collective matrix. It's a neuroelectrical biological cascade of some sort. And I'm sure many of you have had this experience. I certainly do when I have smoked DMT, but the scanning, the droning, and it gets higher pitched and higher pitched until you reach this sort of crescendo and you break through the chrysalis or the chrysanthemum rather, right? It's that the radio intellecty sort of exiting out of the interior fontanelle of your head, as Terence McKenna said. So it's kind of like when you're cleaning out the attic, right? Dust is flying everywhere. The scrub and bubbles are doing their thing. There's the unearthing of old hoary chestnuts and creotic remnants. The creepypasta of the mind, psychic viruses, shadow creatures. It's like a recurring Eleusinian jubilee that purifies the palimpsest, if I can be so poetic there. And if all goes well, demons are slayed and the spirits resurrected. Dreams and visionary states may often reflect culture. Artifacts within culture reflect our predicament. Cultural artifacts are extruded dream material or unconscious material, all a part of the vast entangled cosmic web, shimmering reflections of a single cosmic mind. And our evolution for the past 100,000 years has involved primarily culture and technology, not a somatic alteration. And today we're seeing very new, interesting phenomena being revealed. A reflection of dissolving boundaries and what I call migratory traversing. If you're a cultural anthropologist, you don't have to go to Mozambique to study culture. You can witness very fascinating phenomenon in your own backyard. But whether it's art, toys, or technology, these cultural artifacts create their own disappearance. It's a migration into a transcendental domain. Where are they going? That bridge between spirit and matter. And we saw the disappearance of art in the 20s, with Marcel Duchamp and his ready-mades. Now we're seeing the disappearance of data. We see this with cloud storage, which changes our relationship to matter. It becomes very ghostly. And there's also the reverse modality where virtual objects are resurrected as flesh, like in the 3D printer. So it's an ecstatic cyclone that reflects our destiny and the animated spirit that exists as part of a transcendental modality. It's accelerating and fusing and mutating at a rapid pace. Is it the spirit creating beauty and art out of cultural detritus? Is it a type of cosmic psychospiritual bricolage, the exteriorization of the soul becoming dirigible? It's a response from nature. It's like nature as the bowerbird. Right? And we can see our reflections in all the mirrored, shimmering jewels that make up that vast cosmic nest of the bowerbird as we ready ourselves for flight. And I believe virtuality and simulation, technology, the internet resurrect myths of origin and authenticity and lived experience, and also represent our destiny for transcendental migration, a yearning for the spirit, an attraction to the Godhead. It's about unity and transformation. And we need to pay attention to this. All history is about creating prototypes of this with greater and greater closure, right? Automobiles, planes, ships, starships, all represent self-transforming products of flight or self-transcendence. And we're seeing some really unique things, kind of modern alchemy, like living here in Portland. You see this in places like San Francisco, but the continual refining of gourmet foods, right? The foodie culture, the DIY culture, fusion products, all this stuff. Fascinating. Okay, so let's talk about consciousness, holograms, and non-locality, the amazing capabilities of the mind and evidence that we're intersected with a hyperdimensional reality. And that everything is truly alive. What if everything we see in the visible universe is ultimately a crystallization of a vast mind, which has a singular identity and awareness? Well, new discoveries may force materialist science to rescind the old theory in favor of something more like the TV analogy, where the brain comes to be understood as a transceiver rather than as a generator of consciousness, and in which consciousness is recognized as non-local in nature. And many scientists question the existence of consciousness itself since they have no tools with which to weigh or measure it and no formula to express it. They find no alternative but to deny its existence. The Baxter effect is one of the most fascinating feats in scientific history. Before I go into his research, it's before I kind of mentioned the holographic universe. Holograms possess an amazing capacity for information storage. And if human consciousness is arranged holographically, this explains the amazing memory and processing capacities of the human mind, as well as other animals like bees, doing this very complex waggle dance, which takes many more neurons than they actually have. And of course, they live in, sort of these sacred geometric structures. That might have something to do with it. The harmonic mind, right? So we're surrounded by a myriad of energies and energy fields that don't become our reality until our consciousness observes and processes them. So essentially, we're one mind, and only certain aspects of the mind are the result of physiologic processes. Physical reality is a manifestation of consciousness. All points of consciousness are a part of a network of life that they both inform and influence and are informed and influenced by. So Baxter, Dr. Cleve Baxter, had been involved in polygraph research on humans for about 20 years. He decided one late night to hook up his polygraph machine to a Dropina plant his secretary purchased, and then he tried flicking the leaves with the pen and doing all this stuff. Nothing happened. But then he had this thought: what if I got a match and burned the plant's electroded leaf? The plant was 15 feet away at the time, and what would happen next would change the history of science forever, but the impact clearly has still not reached our common public awareness. But the plant recorded dramatic excitation from a mere thought, and that was, he duplicated this over and over again, weeding out different variables, putting them in Faraday cages. He presented the results in Electrotechnology magazine. He actually appeared on Johnny Carson, Art Linkletter, Merv Griffin, David Frost. Now, in the 70s, Dr. V. N. Pushkin replicated these experiments with success. But despite all these very intriguing results, the scientific community was very severe in its criticism, unfortunately. And what they found was this, that every living thing is intimately attuned to its environment. When any stress, suffering, or death occurs, all the life forms in the surrounding area have an immediate electrical response, as if they all share the same pain. So our minds broadcast waves of information that can be picked up by any living cells at any distance. And if all living things are sharing a constant psychic attunement with one another, perhaps our minds deliberately screen out most of this information for our own sanity. Sperry Andrews proposed that 500 different scientific studies have proven that human consciousness can affect biological and electronic systems. Other researchers explored nearly 40 different studies during which people successfully shared thoughts and experiences while they were physically separated from one another. The overall probability that these were caused by chance alone was less than 1 part in a trillion. Now, then there's the notion of morphogenetic resonance or morphic resonance. And so each time a new task for survival is learned, it's added to the cumulative store of material contained in the morphic field. Rupert Sheldrake did a lot of research in this area. He came up with this idea. But tasks and life becomes assimilated into the morphic field as memory and habit, thus becoming available to all members of the species. And its power to influence future forms is strengthened through habitual reiterations. These memory traces are known as creative patterns, and it explains things like the 100th monkey phenomenon. This also explains simultaneous discovery, calculus, the electrical battery, the telephone, the steam engine, the radio. All these groundbreaking innovations were hit upon by multiple inventors working in parallel with no knowledge of one another. In fact, Alexander Graham Bell, after he developed the telephone, spent the next 10 years in court with about 100 different people who invented the telephone at the same time. Anthropologists have shown that the same inventions tended to crop up in prehistory at roughly similar times, in roughly the same order among cultures on different continents that couldn't possibly have contacted one another. Rupert Sheldrake asserts that a variety of experiments support the idea that we're all accessing a common data bank of information when we try to think about something like solving problems, puzzles, and so forth. Okay, so I wanted to talk about galactic consciousness, which comes from this idea by Gregory Sams in his book on stellar consciousness. And he goes on to mention that most people think the sun is just this dumb ball of gas. But sun and other stars turn simple hydrogen and helium into all the elements that make us up in the world around us. They're transmutation engines of the cosmos. 93% of the matter in our body was born in the body of a star, so essentially we're made of stardust and powered by starlight. Our sun has 7 distinct layers, all with different functions, with some of them rotating at different speeds. The corona or heliosphere occupies more space than the sun itself and protects the entire solar system as our galaxy rotates at 45,000 miles an hour. NASA also discovered these magnetic portals that connects the sun's corona to the Earth's geomagnetic field, known as the flux transfer event. Stars also live in clusters, superclusters. They have binary systems. If you think about light and its multiple wavelengths, it underpins nearly all of our technology of information transfer. Our cells use photons to communicate. Plants communicate with photons, right? So they're joined up communities of intelligent dynamic beings. And the Mayans believe that the galactic center was the sort of the Hunab Ku. They were really in tune with all this information as well. So when you really explore your dreams, your psychedelic sessions, and really think about our history as a human species, our extremely rapid evolution from picking berries on the plains to sending rovers to Mars in 100,000 years, I mean, there's no doubt there's some sort of, alien supermind intervening. Is it a Gaian mind? Is it the integrated biome intelligence of the planet? It's very clear that there is some kind of hyperdimensional intelligence intersecting with life on Earth. And the shamans have been communicating with these spirits for thousands of years. And people ask, well, why haven't they just landed? You can't materialize a mile-long mothership above the world's biggest cities or land a pod racer in the middle of a baseball game and start introducing xenopolitical agendas or handing out free energy devices, right? It can't be invasive. As Terence McKenna said, they insinuate themselves through the mental dimension. They hide behind the pink elephants. But as an advanced civilization, you got to do recon work, study the situation on the planet. And I'm sure from what they've seen so far that we've failed the litmus test. We're one big dysfunctional family. But this is changing. The old paradigms are breaking away. And within our lifetimes, I can almost say for certain that we'll lay witness to the biggest and most significant and important event in history. Joining with other communities out there in the cosmos. A true alchemical wedding. The universe is teeming with intelligent life. In fact, the universe itself is intelligent and alive. The multiplicity of life in the universe, while diverse, is essentially a singularity. Beyond division, it exists in the unitive state, a marvelous conscious oneness. All that there is exists in its true nature as pure, undifferentiated, eternal mind. And, we're orbiting a galactic geometry that is intelligent and alive. We're learning new things. We're evolving into a new stage of what it means to be human and alive on Earth. So, and eventually, newer galactic civilizations. I think that's what Terence McKenna meant when he said, going to the stars. And that's what I always get from my entheovisions. But, what really hits this home are these statistics from NASA and the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. I mean, this is amazing, and these are very conservative statistics in terms of the 1% thing. So for every star in the Milky Way, there's an estimated 1 galaxy. if 1% of all the stars in the universe have Earth-like planets, that's 100 billion Earth-like planets. Assume only 1% have Earth-like planets, and assume 1% of those advances to an intelligent level. That means 10 quadrillion intelligent civilizations in the universe. You apply the same math to the Milky Way, that's 1 billion Earth-like planets, and that's 100,000 intelligent civilizations. So we need a reorientation and awareness of beauty in all life in the cosmos. We need to open our eyes. We're in denial of our circumstance, our eerie, awesome, and miraculous predicament. If we could actually feel the situation, we'd all get out of our cars and go out and try to stop the madness. We don't truly feel it. We have to view the dream and the entheovision as a technology and be guided by its peculiar logic to creatively reform our language so that we think in new ways beneficial and supportive of our destiny. So today's world represents, you could say, maybe a loss of control where our semantic, political, economic, and mimetic systems are dissolving and reforming at a rapid pace, and I believe into something more sublime. It's about living life generatively so we can increase the kinds of opportunities we make available to ourselves to give birth to a new form of life. This is what I call the primer of emergent possibility. The moment we embrace beauty, fear, failure, and the unknown, that risk to achieve what is seemingly impossible, we open the doors to a primer of emergent possibility. And then, as Joe Campbell said, the universe will open doors where there were only walls. So it's kind of like in that movie Contact, where we have, Jodie Foster receiving these messages with her radio telescopes. Even though we've been contacted. But she gets a message from Vega. They try to put it together. It's a video broadcast of Hitler. And then S.R. Haddon comes along surreptitiously and secretively and says, hey, you got to think like a vegan. And thus revealing the primer. And this is what we need, what the entheovision reveals, this primer of emergent possibility. And I bring all this up because scientific concepts that are at the edge of our understanding and that completely defy common belief systems and scientific and philosophical models will aid us in creating that prerequisite spark to unleash unbridled pride and passion for our predicament, whether it's being immersed in a cumulative store of chaotic patterns, all the experience of our entire history on this planet at our fingertips, or our ability to remote view, heal, manipulate the very fabric of reality, or the fact that plants communicate with each other and ourselves and through a vast cosmic matrix, or that plants and stars are alive and communicate with each other and ourselves through energetic portals, or that we can transcend ordinary reality by manipulating ever so slightly our brain chemistry, or that masses of people meditating simultaneously can reduce crime dramatically, or the contact that the more benevolent members of our society have made with ET civilizations, including all the psychonauts who've done so through the entheovision, or the 5,000 patents for devices that have been confiscated and suppressed and that would completely dissolve our reliance on archaic technologies that destroy the planet. And the vast array of thousands of research studies that reveal a mind-blowing reality in that we have already made it to the singularity point. We have accomplished the dream that we have been working toward for millennia. We have arrived. We have everything we need to completely transform life on this planet, to dissolve boundaries, suffering, disease, poverty, hunger, war, existential boredom. Yet we have a failure to surrender to what we know is right. During the civil rights era, only 20% of the population believed in change, in human equality. Yet change was initiated by only a handful of people with the passion they felt within the center of their beings. Today, roughly 75% of the population believes things should change, at least in terms of the corporate consumerist madness, pollution, saving the planet. Yet it's more difficult because the system we're trying to change or dissolve is more deeply embedded within our lifestyles and perceived needs. We need the psychonauts and the artists and the shamanic scientists, poets to have great courage by exuding and exteriorizing the soul through tremendous expressions of creativity to initiate a paradigm change. That's the only way we'll generate the required power over the military, industrial, corporate, gazillionaire, plutocrat complex. Life is only worth living so long as the mysteries continue to form, transform, and inspire us. This is what thousands of years of mythology and the shamans have been telling us and working toward. This is the adventure. This is what's so important about entheogens in the psychonaut, truly living the mysteries and using that experience to be a boon to society, unity and transformation. As above, so below. And it's naive to think that we're just random particles hoisted together and that the universe is not alive in intelligence when you really think about it. We are upon a true alchemical wedding of science and spirituality in this branch of rogue psychonautic ontological engineers pushing the envelope and discovering the truth of what's really going on. So we need to come together and wrestle in the big fish of new ideas, to have an outpouring of artistic expression, because we have everything we need right here and right now. This is the emergent primer possibility, the spark that will get us to the stars. So the entheovision gives us poetry and art and teaches us to live creatively, integratively, to embrace our shadow, to become the adventure. The entheovision is where we belong, at play in the fields of the Eleusinian goddess. The goddess is the eye of inner vision, the vision that goes past the veil, opening to the ear the music of the spheres. This is the celebration of the spark of creation, the expression of art as an extrusion of the soul as part of the goddess herself. This is the basis behind the fear that many have of the dark corners of the unconscious, or the fragmented reality of the dream, or the tabulitics of the psychedelics. They know once you get to the center of that lollipop, and it only takes 3 licks, according to that wise old Ala Minerva, that deep inner nucleus, that consumeristic, fetishistic impulses will no longer hold sway. The spiritual center will fill that once dark, impulsive inner void. The message of the entheovision, then, is that culture can be re-engineered to support the spark of creation to which we're all intimately tuned. Dissolving boundaries. This is ultimate freedom. Whether it's dissolving boundaries between science and religion, the feminine and the masculine, the living and the dead, all boundaries collapse with the entheovision. And revolution is the social allegory that illuminates this, which erupts from the collective unconscious, from the dreamscape. This is not reasonable nor rational, just like the dreamscape or the entheovision is not. It has a logic and breadth of its own. It's the overmind intersecting into the geopolitical gestalt, and the way to escape this cultural stalemate is to have a tremendous eruption of creative expression, which we're more suited to. The entheovision has a central message: how to synthesize conflicting forces, a coincidentia positorum. How to be the expert and the amateur, the creator and the destroyer, the lover and the leader, and also how to return to childhood, the roots, the wellspring, how to exteriorize the soul, how to exude love, passion, and beauty as a force so pervasive that it dissolves boundaries. It radiates outward into our communities and inspires us to truly live, to regain that felt presence of the moment. It's a common human conquest for happiness, peace, and unity, one mind. It's very much like true love. When you have it, it radiates beyond the epicenter of the romantic dyad into the family, into the community. As Joe Campbell said, the adventure the hero is ready for is the one he gets. It's symbolically a manifestation of his character. Our life evokes our character, which is why we put ourselves in situations that evoke our higher nature rather than our lower one. That's what we should do. We need to use our poetic imagination to put the freedom of the human will back into modern life, to turn those giants into windmills. And this is our predicament today, as it was during the Renaissance, but on a grander scale. We all have the philosopher king's point of view, as McKenna said, and the human response should be a display of our unleashed passions, unbridled pride. We're beginning to understand this vastness of the cosmic scale, that the cosmos is alive. So we need to bring the forging quarry back home, combine them into a palatable feast, a feast of nourishment, of imagination, and an elevation of the soul. The process of cooking itself is pouring our nurtured soul into the process, creating gifts for the community, creating art. The modern mythos represents a new element, a singularity point. The earth is sublimating, but only with our help and our technology. The humans, earth, and technology represent the new Holy Trinity. And this is an important time for poets and artists. We need people to take entheogens and transect the mysteries. The reason there's a new resurgence is because it's relevant. This is part of the journey. We need poets and seers to render to us the experience of the transcendent in the world in which we're living. So fellow psychonauts and revolutionaries,